the real reason why I'm trying to get on the secure boot UEFI bandwagon is primarily because people are probably sick of like hearing me like preach. Like I'm a preacher, to get it. Like I'm constantly like saying like you need to future proof your stuff, and like if Windows 11, Windows 11, the what will be the new default operating system of tomorrow, is like requiring that people have like secure boot, which most computers do. The issue is on Linux, secure boot is in like a completely awful, like in terrible state. Like most distros do not have it, and it doesn't work at all. I think Linux Mint also has a tool where it's not in other distros yet, but it's a tool which allows you to automate the process of getting secure boot with your NVIDIA GPU. So like your proprietary NVIDIA GPU with the proprietary driver, because you can get secure boot if you use Nouveau, but not the proprietary driver.
Why?
NVIDIA hates you. That's why.
Thanks, NVIDIA.
The other component too is like back on the topic of like future proofing stuff. Like Windows 11 also requires TPM, right? And one thing that really has me asking questions is like, I'm in the camp of like, we need to have at least some degree of like verified boot, and I believe that Apple and Google are like the only two companies who have got this correctly. However, Google has killed their product line of Chromebooks. So like you can't get Google, official Google Pixel books anymore because no one bought them. Google knows this because Android, especially on like Google's Pixel devices, and to a certain extent, I believe Huawei also has something sort of similar, where there's actually, and Samsung has their own proprietary ripoff, but researchers from Israel prove that like you can't trust like the encryption engine that's in Knox. Knox used to use broken encryption libraries. So and also Knox is proprietary, as opposed to at least with Apple, the concept of the T2 chip and the security chips that's built into the M1 processors and the iPhone are actually they're not open source, but they're very well documented because it's important to understand like how that works. And why would they lie? Because they want to like prove that like their security is worth their salt. Verified boot is something you need to have, and like on like Windows it's like non-existent, and like only now through things like TPM and Pluton are they and it's funny because Pluton loops back into CES because my man Panos Panay got on stage with Lisa Su to talk about Pluton and how like, oh, we're so grateful that AMD created like you guys, you helped us create Pluton, and how it's gonna make Windows 11 more secure and blah blah blah. And
So does verified boot actually like
verified boot doesn't
lock the
exist on
kernel?
any computers that are not phones, Chromebooks, or like Macs. Like it doesn't exist. Like the verified boot does not exist on Windows or Linux at all. Like it is just doesn't exist. And Microsoft is trying to both Microsoft and Red Hat are trying to push to like rectifying this problem a little bit. Because if you go look at online, you can see beta versions of GNOME, and how that GNOME actually now has a menu which actually rates the security of yours. Actually, no, I have to install GNOME Control Panel. I think it's in there now, but if you go look at GNOME Control Panel, you'll see that I get a D rating because secure boot isn't enabled and doesn't work. So like,
How dare you?
yeah, how dare I? But it's kind of the truth. Like if you don't have secure boot enabled, like it's not good. Like as opposed to like when you use like Windows, at least with Windows, you're protected in the sense that like you can use like UEFI, like UEFI, and like Microsoft signs secure boot and blah blah blah. Now, of Linux, it's actually not as secure boot. The situation of secure boot's not as bad as you'd think. It's still bad, but it's not as bad as it sounds, because of the distros, there's only like the two major distros that support it are I'll rail on this again. Fedora, because Red Hat actually has to cough up money to Microsoft to get their driver signed for secure boot, because that's how secure boot works. And this is why you'll see like lots of people on like Reddit and the Hacker News and like Slashdot complaining about like Microsoft trying to like destroy people's freedom by like forcing everyone to pay for like signed drivers and secure boot. But the other Linux distribution which actually pays to have a secure boot is actually Canonical, because Canonical is also Ubuntu supports secure boot out of the box, just like Fedora does. Like the only reason it doesn't work for me is because I have an NVIDIA driver and I need to learn all the commands to use MK I forget, MOK config to actually sign the driver. So basically with secure boot, you need to use Windows, Ubuntu, or Fedora. Now, using MOK config, which I believe is a standard package in Arch Linux. If not, it's probably in the AUR. You can use MOK config to configure secure boot on Arch Linux, but you have to manually control you basically have to write your own signing key. Like you have to make your own boot signing key. So, I'm pretty sure most people don't actually know like how to make like a boot signing key.
Other than like making sure that the kernel's executable is what it says it's supposed to be, what does secure boot do? Does it like prevent the kernel from changing at all, or no?
It's to prevent people from loading arbitrary operating systems that are against your like the person who set it up's knowledge or consent. Because that would be bad, wouldn't it? Like just
Well, I mean, I guess.
And then also verifying that you're loading the correct operating, which is another one. What if someone tricks your motherboard into loading an arbitrary operating system, which is
Yeah, well, that's the thing is I guess it's, for me, it would be less about loading an arbitrary operating system and more about loading the operating system that you purport to be. So like making sure that you're loading the same version of Windows that you intended to load, not like a modified version of Windows where someone installed a crypto miner or something.
That's why we need to push people to use secure boot. Like after like Wayland, the arguments for like Wayland on Linux are done. TPM, again, I'm sort of ties in the secure boot, but again, it's making sure that the operating system that you already have loaded is signed, so you can't just tamper with it or like take it out and bring it to another computer. Like if you need to like back up stuff, like that's one thing, and then because you should be doing that anyway, and TPM won't affect your ability to like make snapshots or whatever. I mean, it will if you're trying to make like full-on snapshots, but like if you're just trying to back up your files, I still recommend, like, even though I don't practice the latter, is I actually have a script which copies out all of my files onto external storage. But the one thing I mentioned, which I should do, which I don't do, is have a bash script which builds my Fedora system from scratch, which I don't have. I probably should. I'm probably going to do that for content sometime, because like people should always have like a build script of whatever not just Linux, but like of Mac OS, of like Windows, so that whenever they first install a thing, they can just run a PowerShell script and just be off. Like if I was on Windows, like I would have like, like we're far enough in where YouTube won't get mad at me, like privacy.sexy's like tweaks for like using for basically like clamming up Windows telemetry. And then I would also have like, the shell script on Chocolaty's website to install Chocolatey, the PowerShell module that enables winget, and really just some more, like, enabling WSL from the command line without having to like, check the box or whatever. Like little stuff like that is like the stuff that I would do.